Rain lashed against the windows of the opulent penthouse suite, mirroring the storm brewing inside Detective Leo Maxwell. He surveyed the scene, a lavishly decorated room, birthday cake untouched, champagne spilled across the Persian rug like crimson tears. The air crackled with tension, a stark contrast to the festive decorations. Marco the Mauler Mancini, notorious mob boss, lay sprawled on the floor, a single bullet hole marring his forehead. Birthday boy didn't even get to blow out the candles, Detective Miller, Leo's partner, quipped, his tone laced with grim humor. Leo ignored him, his gaze sweeping over the small gathering. Mancini's entourage, his nervous consigliere. Frankie Fingers Falcone, the hulking bodyguard, Bruno the Brick Bracchi, and Mancini's beautiful, icy wife, Isabella. Each wore a mask of grief, but Leo sensed something was off. The tension was too thick, the grief too rehearsed. Falcone, Leo barked, start talking. Who was closest to Mancini when it happened? Falcone stammered, I was by the bar, detective. Making sure the champagne was chilled. Bracchi was by the door, and Mrs. Mancini. She was with Mr. Mancini. Leo turned to Isabella, her face pale but composed. Mrs. Mancini, can you confirm this? Isabella nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Yes, detective. I was wishing Marco a happy birthday when it happened. It was so fast. Leo's gut churned. Something didn't add up. Bracchi, a man built like a tank, stood by the door, supposedly unable to see the murder. And Falcone, always jittery, was unusually nervous. He needed to dig deeper. Bracchi, Leo said, you're a bodyguard. Your job is to protect Mancini. How did you miss the shooting? Bracchi shifted uncomfortably. I turned my back for a second, detective. Just for a second. I heard the shot, and that was it. A flimsy excuse. Leo knew Bracchi was lying. He looked back at the body. Mancini's hand clutched a small, worn photograph. Leo carefully retrieved it. It was a picture of a young boy, no more than 10 years old, with a mischievous grin. Beneath the photo, a single word was scrawled, Luca. Who's Luca? Leo asked, holding up the photo. Silence. No one answered. Leo's suspicion deepened. This wasn't just a simple mob hit. This was personal. He spent the next few days immersed in Mancini's world, a labyrinth of illicit deals, betrayals, and violence. He discovered Mancini had a secret past, a life he'd desperately tried to bury. He'd grown up poor, in a tough neighborhood, and had clawed his way to the top of the criminal underworld. Leo tracked down Luca. He was Mancini's illegitimate son, abandoned years ago. Luca was now a young man, struggling to make ends meet, working as a mechanic. He'd never known his father. Leo brought Luca in for questioning. The young man was shocked to learn about his father's death. He swore he had nothing to do with it. Leo believed him. Luca was genuinely devastated. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but something was still missing. He returned to the penthouse, re-examining the scene. He noticed something he'd overlooked before, a small scratch mark on the inside of the window pane. It was almost invisible, but Leo's trained eye spotted it. He examined the window closely. It was locked from the inside. Impossible for someone to have entered from the outside. Unless, he looked at Isabella. She'd been standing next to Mancini when he was shot. She'd said she'd been wishing him a happy birthday. But what if she'd been doing more than that? Leo's mind raced. The scratch mark, the locked window, Isabella's calm demeanor. It all pointed to her. But why? Mancini was rich, powerful. She had everything. He confronted Isabella. She denied everything, her eyes flashing with anger. But Leo saw through her facade. He told her about the scratch mark, about the locked window. He told her about Luca. Isabella's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face. She confessed she hadn't loved Mancini. She'd married him for his money, his power. But she'd grown to despise him. She'd learned about Luca, his secret son. She'd seen the photo. The word Luca scrawled beneath it. She'd realized Mancini still cared for his son, that he might even try to find him, to bring him into his life. She couldn't bear the thought of sharing Mancini's wealth, his affection. She'd planned the murder meticulously. She'd waited for the right moment, when everyone was distracted. She'd shot Mancini, then calmly resumed her position, pretending to be grieving. She'd even created the scratch mark herself, to make it look like someone had entered from the outside, but she hadn't counted on Leo's persistence, his attention to detail. She'd underestimated him. Leo arrested Isabella. As she was being led away, she looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and resignation. "You were right," she said. "I underestimated you." Leo watched her go, a sense of satisfaction mixed with sadness. He'd solved the case, brought justice to Mancini's unknown son. But he knew that the world was a dark place, where even love and family could be twisted into motives for murder. He looked at the photo of young Luca, his innocent smile a stark contrast to the darkness he'd uncovered. He thought of the boy, growing up poor, unaware of his father's wealth and his mother's treachery. And then it hit him. Luca. The name wasn't just a name. It was an acronym. Luca understands criminal activities. Mancini hadn't abandoned his son. He'd been grooming him. The photo wasn't a memento. It was a message. A message to Luca, revealing his inheritance, not of money, but of power. Mancini's empire. The twist wasn't that Isabella killed Mancini. The twist was that she played right into his hands. Mancini's death was just the beginning. Luca was coming.